session. And um, we have 5 speakers with us, and of course, it's a great advantage. So we'll hear diversities of views and experiences. At the same time, it will be important to manage the time well. So good afternoon, and my name is Fabrizio Felloni, person here. I am Deputy Director of Evaluation at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, or IFAD. And this session is of particular interest. You might have seen that some of the presentation and plenaries that we had so far were about national systems, national evaluation systems. In this case, we take a look at sectoral systems. And so how some of them might be connected to a national evaluation architecture and system, but some might not. And so we are looking at particular sectors. We are going to look at, for example, agriculture sector, broadly defined. We're going to look at a health sector, and we're also going to look at climate change or climate change mitigation adaptation, and also commerce. So as you can see, quite broad. And let me just name the 5 guests, and then later on I will present them a bit more with their exact titles. So Orifyan Namozov from Uzbekistan. Then we have Sanjeev Sridharan from India and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Then we have Anastasia Aladisheva from the Green Climate Fund. We have Alok Mishra from India and Shabnum Shafras from Pakistan. So the way we're going to conduct this session is the following. We will have 8 minutes for each of the speaker to introduce their presentation. And broadly speaking, what we ask them to talk about is the experience they had with developing a sectoral system for evaluation. What was the situation at the baseline? What were the issues they had to tackle with? And how they have developed, how they moved, and what have been achieved, but also what needs to be improved, because of course these are big challenges, and for the long period. After, we will have perhaps the first 3 speakers to go together. Maybe after 3 we can take a break and ask questions, interact a little bit with the audience, and then we can have the last 2 speakers together. We'll play a little bit depending also on the topic that they deal with. So without much further ado, let me just start with the first speaker. So Mr. Orifyan Namozov, who is Deputy Director for Strategic Planning and Analysis at the International Strategic Center for Agri-Food Development, Minister of Agriculture of Uzbekistan. So, Mr. Namozov, you have the floor, either from there or from here, as you prefer. Please.
Thank you very much, Fabrizio. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I am very delighted to be part of this great event, and really I am enjoying from such a big event in terms of not quantity of delegates, but the scale of the topics related to the resilient national evaluation systems. I'm not expert in evaluation, but I'm learning this system step by step. That's why I will try to talk to the story of Uzbekistan, and I will try to be short. Honestly, I have not prepared the presentation. Just during the listening of delegates, presenters, I was just writing many interesting ideas, and just for half an hour I did in a rush some 8 slides. I'm sorry if it's like a bit mess. It's not ordered, it's not systematized, but I think these are very important ideas. So maybe it's like this. How I should run the. So our topic is agri-food sector. I'm just writing this one. Okay. Maybe from by hand, yeah. So I'm sorry for the technical sometimes factors. So I would like just to mention some important ideas from the agri-food sector. So let's start from the first slide, please. So It's first of all about economics. We have to understand what's the agri-food sector. It's not even the agriculture, it's agri-food. So, the value chain is quite long and big, starting from the inputs, farming, in-farm processing, off-farm processing, and industrial processing. It's to the trade, to the export, until the customer. So actually, we have many sections of related to the agri-food sector, not just only the agriculture. For example, we have a value chain problems. For example, good agricultural practice, inputs, machinery, right? But let's forget about the agriculture section. For example, we have a food security and nutrition block. This sector is like also specific. In Uzbekistan, we are highly dependent on wheat. So this creates the crowding out effect of the other horticulture. That's why we are now, government is trying to increase to support the horticulture sector, but it requires, let's say, reallocation of land to the vegetables and fruits. That's a bit painful process. For example, another thing is climate change. All of a sudden, climate is started to change, and it's now we have problems with both climate adaptation and the second, the climate mitigation. These are different things, but step by step, our government started to think about it. Also, this is another dimension which putting the additional pressure to the agri-food sector. Global turmoil, of course, the Russian-Ukraine war has impacted the COVID pandemics. Who knows what will be tomorrow? It's uncertainty. The conversation biodiversity is also it's very important because agriculture is not like just economics, just to increase the level of production, but it's also about sustainability, about biodiversity, about conservation, because all these resources should be some kind of preserved for the next generations. Global logistics, of course, Uzbekistan is doubly landlocked country, the specific country. That's why it creates another dimension, a very pressure on the agricultural sector, because it's all about the export input, right? To be competitive, we have to think how to overcome using the technologies, how to overcome this logistics cost. Water energy is a big headache in Uzbekistan because this Amudarya and Sirdarya from upstream, it goes to downstream, and Uzbekistan is the downstream area. So it's why we are highly dependent from the other countries, like, for example, Kyrgyzstan, because rivers started there. That's why water problem is high, and energy as well, because we are using the pumping stations, and around 60–50% of these pumps are old, and we have to invest hugely to let's say to make some kind of change. This is a part of story. So why I'm talking about economics first of all, and what's the relations to the evaluation? You see the complexity of the problem, complexity of agri-food sector, especially the country specific. Some of them are common, some of them not, some of them specific for Uzbekistan, but it creates huge burden to the monitoring and evaluation. Because experts should be very high-skilled guys, ladies and gentlemen, to understand. Because what's the evaluation? It's the evaluation of high-level program strategies, or let's say projects, minor projects. And we have a real problem with the supply of real smart evaluation experts. But what's the interesting is just started to understand the area of evaluation. We are very new in this area. Please, next slide. This is about economics. This is about what? It's like system and system. You know what? For example, you will have evaluation system, sectoral evaluation system, right? From strategy, in Uzbekistan, we have a strategy, agri-food strategy. It's accepted in 2019, but that's all. We have just strategy. It's abstract, big, but nobody understands what's about, because it's not disaggregated to the program level. It's not disaggregated to the project level. Because that's why we are missing these subordinated programs. And of course, we have some projects, particularly financed by donors. But these are projects, and linkages between the projects and the strategy is not evident now. It creates a very big chaos. That's why what I'm just trying to tell that this system requires sectoral evaluation system requires a national evaluation system. It's a bit different because with our strategic approach, we can't run, let's say, any evaluation system, I guess, even in agriculture. Next slide, please. Okay, we'll be very fast. So this is about the ex post. So I'm just trying to say that for us important to link ex ante and ex post, not just because otherwise ex post evaluation will be useless if it was not properly planned or programmed. Please, next slide. So it's between the donors and the nation. It's a donor-driven strategy or a nation-driven strategy. Because in Uzbekistan, there are many donors, they are coming to ministry and they're just trying to understand and to write some kind of strategies. Okay, but but honestly, government doesn't understand. Honestly, government now has not maybe capacity to develop by themselves the proper strategy. And we believe that it should be not donor-driven, it should be nation-driven, or some kind of balance between these international interventions and domestic understanding. And next slide, please. This is, let's say, we have a many pilot projects, but the problem is, again, these piloting projects are not properly contributing to the strategic priorities and strategy. That's why what is stopping? Maybe not because of the monitoring and evaluation, because monitoring and evaluation is something residual. First of all, we have a problem with programming. Again, it's about that we have a very weak strategic programming and planning. That's why many pilots just remain like pilots without sustainability. That's why we have to think in more comprehensive way. Please, next slide. This is about capacity building. I was listening very today about many experts told about training and blah, blah, blah. Very important. I believe that capacity building is not, it is a system, it's a big system, especially for developing countries. It's not about just training, it's about to understand its technical assistance should go to the knowledge sharing, technology transfer, innovation and research, etc., etc. So because it's complementarity. Some people talk about the complementarity. Without complementarity, all this, you will not cook the dish to the client. Next one, last one, I think. So it's the last one. I'm sorry, it's like about ecosystem of sectoral evaluation system. For example, agri-food sector, what we have to think about when we are thinking about designing of sectoral evaluation system, let's say agri-food. We have to think about strategic planning framework, statistic data management, international standards, cooperation with donors, transparency and accountability, capacity of public ministers, and maybe more other, okay? This is a big, in Uzbekistan, we have problem everywhere. Because we have problem with statistics and data management, international standards are not properly, let's say, introduced. Transparency and accountability is a huge problem, but we are doing progress. Cooperation with donors, again, I told it's more donor-driven. Donors come and they, let's say, some of them dictate. But government sometimes accepts, sometimes rejects, sometimes don't answer. That's why we have to work. Capacity of public ministers and agencies. Today, agriculture is divided between 5-6 ministries. So we have to consolidate the government and to put, let's say, more capacity. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I was.
Thank you. And in any case, we can come back to some of the points later on when we are getting to the question and answer session. Subsession. Thank you very much, Mr. Namosov. And now we have the second speaker. So Mr. Sanjeev Sridharan, country lead for learning system at the and evaluation at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in India. Over to you, Flora. Thanks.
Terrific. Story I'm going to tell is of an ongoing capacity building experiment on building the capacities of the health sector in one of the smaller states in India called Meghalaya. Just to sort of fix it in your mind, Meghalaya is on the eastern side of India, right above Bangladesh, a smaller state. Just to give you a sense, we actually had the session about 2 months ago. Most of the ministers were around. The chief minister inaugurated the session itself too. There are at least a couple of people in this room who were part of this. I'll be mentioning them. But the story is an important one because I think too often in stories, if you read the literature on sectoral evaluations, there's often a scorecard which says your story falls like the systems are terrible. Well, that's predictable. I'm not sure how useful that kind of evaluation is. So the question is, how do you actually build a system here? Well, the answer is you get the chief minister involved, you get the principal health secretary involved, and you work on concrete problems. And I'll just sort of lay it out in the 8 minutes I have. So really, I think the scorecard approach, I'm pretty convinced you're wasting time. Get on with it, kind of stuff too. Two, another area that we waste time is to sort of really go in with just one evaluation approach, often summative. But I think the idea that no, we're trying to build systems. You need a more developmental approach. You need to be thinking about a range of different things. I don't think we are very good in mixing different approaches. And I think we've got to take that seriously. Three, we've got to build capacities. And I want to stress, too often in our capacity building work, we get caught up in rather 1970s and 1980s discussions on monitoring and evaluation. Actually thinking about what kinds of capacities do you need to build on addressing inequities, a fairly fundamental question I don't think as a field we've addressed. And I think the way to address it is not by experts in this room, but actually going to the field and actually get folks from local governments and local districts talk about it. I think the kiss of death of sectoral level work is project level thinking. We fund projects, we don't fund sectors. That's a problem. And how do we actually think about building capacities? Really critical. We get paid for developing products as evaluators, not for developing learning processes. And actually for change, you need to be building an iterative learning processes. So I've got 5.5 minutes remaining. There's a very cool website that I'm going to share with you to sort of leave you with that. But these were the 10 principles that guided us. Pretty soon we realized Alok, who's sitting out here, was the Deputy Director General of the Development Monitoring Evaluation Office. His successor, Shailendra, was pivotal in this. Ian Goldman, who's sitting out there, was actually played a very critical part in the success of the school. But we felt there's nothing like just state level or sub. I think this whole idea of national versus subnational misses the point. These have to be multi-level. And the moment you start focusing on one level, I think you're already headed off course. Two, really critical. We're not talking just to evaluators. You've got to build evaluation capacities of frontline staff, of implementers, of policymakers, not just of evaluators. Evaluators have a role to play. Three, I think we tend to blabber too much of the OECD criteria. You've got to create spaces where people say, this is what matters. The very fact, I mean, Ian speaks about another setting, inequities is not even part of the OECD criteria, I think is shocking. Four, very critical. We get paid to evaluate solutions. Actually, we need to be getting paid to actually think about the problem in a deeper way. So one of the successes of the workshop, Michael Woolcock, a great friend from Harvard, flew down and held the first day of discussions on problem-driven iterative adaptation. So the idea was we created spaces. They said, the problem out here is maternal health inequities. What are your solutioning around it? And then we try to build evaluations around that. Six, a range of evaluation approaches in the few days that we had, focused on theories of change, but we really stressed not what a theory of change was, but how do you start thinking about inequities differently as a result of theories of change? What data matters? Quite fundamental to our work is to think about system dynamics. It's system dynamics that change. It's not an intervention. No intervention can address health inequities by itself. You've got to think about systems. And so again, we had folks who had spent many years in Centers for Disease Control. Super critical. We have the bad habit of talking about evidence. No, there's nothing like evidence. There's ecologies of evidence. And you've got to start thinking about what ecology matters, what kinds of evidence matters for your problem itself. And so a huge amount of time spent on inequities and sustainability. There were 10 parts, a fantastic section on performance measurement. Ian presented on learnings from South Africa and transforming systems. It's fantastic. He spoke at the national level, but it's really important to sort of see proof, because a lot of these are abstract ideas. When you actually can learn, and you speaking from South Africa, it really sort of realized we're not just sort of talking abstract, empty ideas. It can be done. We ended by talking about, so okay, great. We've had a great, how do we actually build in a learning step and learning process? And here comes the cool part. Now, there are multiple districts. We're focusing on one district, and we're now going deep into that district and then building, a series of lessons around that. So, in the short 2 minutes I have remaining, very critical that most of us are evaluators. Most of us are working in either government or UN agencies, etc. But this idea that we need to actually build spaces for cohesive solutions. Because again, I say, as evaluators, we start with the intervention. I get paid to evaluate an intervention, knowing fully well that intervention is not going to solve mental health problems. How do we build a cohesive? Creating spaces, I think, is part of our job. 2, it's stewardship, not just leadership. The idea that there are very different actors here. How do we create spaces where we empower people to say, no, mental health inequity is going to require this. And so the person from the Ripple Foundation who spoke on system dynamics, Bobby Milstein, spoke brilliantly about the need for stewardship in transforming health systems. 3, I think as a field, we are still too caught up in the average. I don't think we either pay serious attention to context. When we do, it's a few academic types who kind of blabber, poor versus rich context, etc. No, I think we've got to start thinking about spaces in which we better understand the heterogeneity. So Meghalaya, for example, in some cases, to go from one part to over 200 kilometers will take you 8 hours or so. Just the context is pretty intense. I've already stressed capacity building as a multi-level problem. All of these ideas, there's a big story to be told. I'm mindful of time. This is my last slide. So this is the important thing is check this out. We're going to be putting up the videos in the next couple of days on this set. It's a very unfriendly Meghalaya Evaluation School. So email me if you have a problem. I think the way I think about it as we think about sectoral, I tend to follow a realist approach to evaluation, but I'm interested in under what context is a program most likely to work. I think a lot of those questions, Ray Parsons, a friend, we tend to ask that at the program level. I think we've got to ask that at the system level. How do we, for this kind of system, what kinds of sets of interventions are we needed? We need to move it to that level. And I think this I was talking to Oscar earlier, that the wonderful thing about UNDP and other, you actually have a chance to bring all these partners together. So this idea of really bringing in a diversity of views, you're fantastic. To the whole idea of this engagement, take 30 seconds, is to rethink evaluation criteria. That's why in my question today, I was really kind of saying, no, we need to create spaces where rethinking is allowed, not just validation or reification of certain views that comes out of Brussels or Delhi. Third, I think we don't do a good job. Often evaluations are product driven. These collaborative spaces are required for sectoral work, and we don't have enough of them. And when we evaluate, we tend to work in silos. So evaluators can contribute to a greater silification as opposed to a greater, bringing people together. I think the last point is, I think as a field, we've got to be far more serious about the kinds of capacity building work we need for inequities and sustainability. And I think that's fundamental if we are going to be addressing issues of SDGs, issues of what the post-COVID world is. I don't think we've spent as much time needed to build the kinds of skill sets needed for inequity and sustainability. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. And I can see also some common topics that come from these two first presentations. One of them is, of course, the level of analysis that you want to look at when building an evaluation system, project versus sector versus policy. And also the role of stakeholders, but also the complexity of the evaluant itself and the methodology. So maybe we can get back to this later in the discussion. So let me move to the third speaker, who is Anastasia Aladisheva, who is an Impact Evaluation Officer in the Independent Evaluation Unit of the Green Climate Fund. So the floor is yours, either from here or from the podium, as you prefer.
Thank you, Fabrizio. If it's okay, I'll keep being seated.
Please.
Yes, I'm an Impact Evaluation Officer, and I represent the Learning-Oriented Real-Time Impact Assessment Program, which I shortly presented today in the morning during the plenary session. Next slide, please. So now it's kind of a follow-up of that presentation, and I'll quickly try to give a few lessons from our work. So this is a demand-driven capacity building program in impact evaluations of GCF investments, and we started in 2018. What I mean by the demand-driven is that it's not a requirement by the GCF, We organize yearly a workshop where we invite project teams with approved projects by the GCF in our yearly capacity building workshop on impact evaluations, where we provide training in impact evaluations. And after that workshop, we select some of the project teams based on certain criteria. And one of the criteria is their motivation to join LORTA. It's a multi-year engagement. So we produce evidence and inform GCF investments and decisions to measure attributable change on the ground effectively and efficiently. As I mentioned in the morning, we have 22 country projects in our portfolio, spanning different continents and results areas. So for example, currently we have 5 projects with only baseline data. So it's Rwanda, Guatemala, Zambia, Madagascar, Georgia. And we have 2 projects with already endline data. One is Malawi, UNDP project, and in Bangladesh, also UNDP project, which we're currently collecting endline data. So I don't know if you can see clearly this map. So here's the map of our projects, impact evaluation projects in our portfolio. And you can see the so-called accredited entities, organizations that with approved projects by GCF with whom we work. So this is international accredited entities like UNDP and FAO, IUCN, but also the direct access entities, for example, national entities that I mentioned in the morning, FMCN in Mexico. So yellow color is the inception phase. So we're only starting the engagement. We hold an inception workshop where we go through the project, understanding the targets of the project, building theory of change, building or suggesting impact evaluation designs, and kind of trying to speak the same language with the project team and understand their needs. And green are where the baseline data is already collected. And one is impact evaluation completed. We have only one at the moment, so we're quite a young team, I must say. So a few lessons from our work in impact evaluations. And I must say that impact evaluations, which is a specific type of evaluations, which look at the cause and effect, looks at attribution. And these are very specific, and this is not a cure for everything, of course. So we have our challenges based on the work from other organizations that implement impact evaluations. So one of the key messages here is that we need to engage, and the COVID was a real challenge for us because sitting in South Korea and engage with the project team somewhere in Senegal is quite challenging. And we need to provide and receive timely feedback, make sure there's enough time to properly revise all necessary components of the project for an impact evaluation. And at times, the project, although it's an approved project, some of the project elements are yet not clear to the project team. So we have to, learning by doing, so to speak. Flexibility. So we need to accommodate the project needs, of course, because it's a demand-driven program. We need to respect procurement schedules, changes to the project that may lead to an immediate revision of the evaluation strategy. We provide several impact evaluation designs kind of as a menu to make sure that we have a backup plan if some of the impact evaluation designs don't go as we planned. For example, one of the gold standard impact evaluation design is a randomized control trial where a project is randomly allocated to one of the let's say, a group of communities, and another group of communities serve as a counterfactual or the so-called control group with which you compare the outcomes. And sometimes randomization is not possible, and the project teams or municipality is not happy with the randomization. So we need to have we need to be creative and have a backup plan of what we can do. We provide impact evaluation comes with from the approved by GCF M&E budget, but we provide the technical capacity. So we help with the data analysis, with the report, if needed, to the project teams. And we can allocate more budget to the data collection. So we kind of share the costs of the impact evaluation. And the final result is continuity. So we provide capacity building for data collection firms. We also help draft the terms of references. Usually in some of the organizations, so there's a turnaround of staff. So we need to keep the buy-in and introduce the evaluation sometimes over and over at times. So that's quite a challenge. And this is our first baby that we published early this year. So this is a UNDP project in Malawi, and I can't see the name. I don't remember it by heart, but it's a project on early warning systems, and we so usually the projects are multi-component. One of the components, for example, is a policy component. And we need to identify that component that we can evaluate using impact evaluation methodology. So as I mentioned before, criteria, so motivation of the team is one of them. Another one is innovation. So we look whether the project component is innovative. And of course, which is most important, I would say, is that it's measurable. So we can measure the results of that and have quantifiable kind of indicators. So the lifespan of this project is 6 years, and it's to be completed in 2023, over $12 million investment from GCF. The project is improving access to climate information, forecasts, building weather stations, and et cetera, et cetera. So we look at specific component, which is called participatory integrated approach to agriculture.
Use mine.
Sorry. On climate awareness, decision-making, in agricultural yields, we also find positive impacts that women reduce the casual labor. Ganyu, that's I think how it's called in Malawi. But we don't find any impacts on food security. But we, unfortunately, at the moment, we can't measure long-term impacts due to budget constraints and so on and so forth. But this is our first exercise that we completed. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So perhaps we can take a little bit of a break in the sense that we can have some questions or reactions from the audience to the presentation that have been made. You see several issues and challenges when trying to develop a sectoral level system for monitoring evaluation. We heard about, for example, the level of analysis, and it might analyzing policies and analyzing strategy, analyzing projects. In many cases, it might mean actually a stratification of evaluation. So having evaluation at project level and then having a system to aggregate the results so that they respond to questions of the decision makers at the strategy and positive level. And this evaluation may also include impact evaluation, which was one of the cases presented by Anastasia. So perhaps we can gather a few questions from the audience. Any of you question or reactions. Any of you who has been involved, for example, on evaluation systems at the sectoral level and want to react. So we have two gentlemen first here. Would you like to kindly introduce yourselves? And then first there's a gentleman there and then Dr. Goldman. So first you, and then would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Okay. My name is Tomasz Kupiec. I'm from Poland, currently academics, but I grew up in regional evaluation system in Poland. And it's more, let's say it's a question or two questions. I've spent whole day yesterday in Piedmont in the yellow thread listening about national evaluation systems, and I came here interested to check whether I can see any differences and whether what you will relate to in your stories are any different from the national level. And so yeah, that's at the moment, maybe it was in your presentations and stories covered under the facts. So maybe the next presenters and maybe you in the time that's left could reflect on it. What are the actual differences in the challenges, barriers, advantages between the national level systems and the sectoral, subnational system? Because actually one of the presentation, the one from Sanjeev, it's not purely sector, but just subnational level. Yeah, that's the way I understand it. And the second question I have is, again, it's Sanjeev, I will relate to you. You mentioned the system dynamics. The term or the concept of a system is named so many times during this conference, so willingly or not, we are falling into the system theory. So I'm wondering whether when you manage your system or reflect on them, you think of your system as a subsystem of some larger, let's say national or just not non-sectoral or multi-sectoral system. And from this perspective, are the products of your system input to some larger system? Are you somehow determined by the larger system above you? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think we gather questions from 2 or 3 participants, and then we can give back the floor to a panelist. Please.
So my name is Ian Goldman, and I run the evaluation system in South Africa, which is why now with the International Evaluation Academy. And my question is, I mean, when I started working on the South African system in 2011, the only national system which has really developed since we started at that time, we've worked with a number of the countries that had systems, and that's one, is Costa Rica. So national evaluation systems are not actually gaining a lot of traction. And why I'm here in this panel is because my question is, could sectoral evaluation systems be the way to go to build the interest in country from which you can build a national system? But you made this statement, sorry, the gentleman from Uzbekistan, that you must have a national system to build a sectoral system, and I'm questioning that. Because I think if we're in that mode, it's very difficult. But if we can develop sectoral systems, test out modalities for having useful evaluations which really inform management and policy and make a difference, then there's an argument that can be made across the state. It's a question for everybody, but it was specifically meant.
Thank you so much. So perhaps, let me give another question from another participant, and then we move to answering. Please, Madam.
Okay, hi, I'm Ilaf Zain Abdin, and I'm an M&E officer. So my question is to Anastasia, is about the selection of the project. How do you select your project, and do you have any criteria to selection?
Okay, so perhaps we can start from the last question and take the question in reverse order. So choice of project, then we can move to the national. Do you need a national system for a sectoral system, or the other way around? And then the other question was about the difference between national and sectoral systems. So who wants to start? Perhaps.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, good. Thank you for the question. So we only work with approved projects or projects at the concept note stage. we send an invitation letter every year for these separate projects. They decide whether to come for our capacity building workshop. And then after the workshop, we have certain selection criteria. So it's a motivation, innovation, ability to measure the results of the project component, and so on. And we make our own kind of short list, and then we send them to the project teams, and then they make a decision whether to engage with us or not. So that's in a nutshell.
Thank you. Perhaps we have two speakers, 2 minutes each, because then we have two more panelists to come into the conversation. Please, thank you.
I'll start with Ian's question. I think we have to be opportunistic. I'm not sure you can actually impose the kind of causal thing you're trying to impose sector first, and then if there are lessons to be learned from sector, just be greedy, just be plagiarize, do as much as you can. You see pockets of great work happening in sectoral work in Costa Rica or sectoral work in Ethiopia, and it has implications for a national evaluation system of any kind. So you're really dealing with such a complex system. You're going to, but the idea here, which is a question you're raising, is I think it's uncreative to only look at national evaluation systems to learn about a national evaluation system. So any lessons we can learn from a sectoral work, and again, the cast of characters involved and what it takes is important, and vice versa. So I'm not sure the causal directions will run one way, but I think that the bigger point I'm raising is we're not as opportunistic as we need to be. That's point number one, kind of stuff too. I think for me, coming back to Thomas's questions, just to be very clear, there's 8 minutes. There's a very strong focus on health. It was not just about it. I don't have time to get too caught up in the health details itself. So as an example, there's a very rich worldview around health inequalities and social determinants of health, which is a pretty important part of this workshop. I just didn't have the time to go into that. There was a focus on this. So that's the other part I want to stress. When you are building sectoral systems, sectoral evaluation systems, the substantive details matter tremendously. And so that's point number one. I think the point about system dynamics is, I just want to say, without getting too caught up in different definition systems, the big idea here is we've got to get away from evaluation's habit of saying, here is an intervention, pre-post, we saw these changes, and great, this program works better than the other program. You've got to think through, for example, in the case of diabetes, maybe the best performing systems of solutions are not the ones that produce great results in the first 2 years, the first 3 years. You've got to really think about it in a much more, so focus more on the dynamic part. The system part really comes from not just your intervention, the different parts itself.
Thank you very much for your very important question. I'm reminding that I participated in a workshop, in the pre-conference workshop. It was given by Jos Heisen, I think from World Bank. It was about the very interesting topic about theory of change. It's like theory of change in evaluation, right? And the thing is like objectively, for example, we have a strategy, and we need to sectoral strategy, agri-food or healthcare, doesn't matter, and we need to understand, is it evaluate? We have to evaluate, is it reaching targets, outcomes, impacts, for example, outputs, and we are constructing these outputs, what outcomes and impacts, and we constructing indicators. And we are just facing that in project level, I mean, in the macro level, these indicators are different. Maybe donors made many interventions, gave money to different kind of, let's say, value chain or supply chain sectors, for example, irrigation, value chain development, milk production, ABCD, so many different. And it's not systematized by our national government. And we are thinking, we have a strategy. Does all these investments reach the targets? And we have to face with the issue of sectoral evaluation and maybe national evaluation, because on the national, we are just agri-food sector is a very huge part of the GDP. It's about 45%. And we have to report to the president, to government, what is the consistency between agri-food sector and the economic growth. So we have to go on higher level and understand all these projects or programs, are they contributing or not? That's why it's like we have a chain of the evaluation process, let's say, starting from grassroots. And do we like it or don't like it? It's like in system theory, we have to understand that theoretically it's existing. But in other ways, are we implementing models of evaluation or not? For example, in my department as a deputy director, I am facing the big trouble. We have strategy, but once per year, our strategy department just once per year calculates some indicators, some full indicators, some of them old indicators, but a very high level. And there is not linkage with the rural development, with the life, with the community, with many, many other impact, very important impact sectors. That's why, and we have many, many projects, the same story. They are very isolated from the strategy, isolated from the sector. So there is a gaps, no linkages. That's why I'm just thinking, what is the design of the system, evaluation system? Does it matter if we are perfect in the projects, but if these projects are not contributing to the systems, to the big systems, to the nation development, what is the value of these projects? Just projects for projects, just money to money, just to satisfy some kind of agreements, official agreements. But we have to think, understand what is the whole story, the whole box, and we have to just design the properly. In planning system, in Soviet system, it was a good because they have a very structured planning system. But in market economy, we don't have a planning system. But we are trying. For example, Austria is one of the best case, like outcome result-oriented planning system, programming planning system. In other countries as well, I'm very glad that I'm hearing today. That's why I hope that step by step we have to find some compromise, to find a way how to provide the linkage between projects, sectoral and national level. Maybe not only evaluation, I'm talking more, let's say, about strategic and programs, and evaluation system is a part of the whole strategic programming chain, right? Because in the first slide I saw it, monitoring and evaluation is just part of, because we have a planning programming part. That's why I'm talking not just about national evaluation system, I'm talking about national planning system. Do we have it or not? Is it coordinated or not? How it's measured? Not, of course, on the project level, right? Because projects have a very specific indicators to evaluate the impacts. But what is about the macroeconomy? What is about the agri-food sector? We should design different kind of indicators. I'm talking about this way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your insights and also including this micro linkages. We go back to with two more panelists today, and I thank them for their patience. First, Mr. Alok Mishra, who from India and who has the title of Additional Director General. And so the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Fabrizio. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to focus on 2 or 3 points and talking about how we are trying to develop a strong M&E ecosystem, but more so how it feeds into sectoral and cross-sectoral approaches. That is the focus of this session. Next slide. So 3 things that I'm going to talk about, that how did we go about developing the culture for data, right? Culture of data. The second thing is that how did we sort of, go about once big evaluations started coming to us, sectoral kind of evaluation, how did we tackle that problem? And how did we institutionalize it further? Because at times government can be very ad hoc in nature. They can be very opportunistic in nature. I need evaluation right now in 6 months, give it to me, and thereafter they'll forget it. And third thing is that how did we create around capacity building, especially for sectoral approaches, requires creating those conversations between policymakers, planners, implementers, evaluators, data people, right? Finance people. So how did we create those conversations to start creating some kind of capacity? And those are initial efforts. So next slide. So what we did, first thing was that, so just wanted to sort of talk about that I come from Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office. And this office came into existence in 2015. Not that we did not have evaluation before that, because we had a planning commission. And as part of that, Program Evaluation Office was part of it. In 2015, the Planning Commission was wound up and then came into existence NEC, which is a strategic government think tank. It's a national institution for transforming India. And as part of it, the role of evaluation also underwent change. As planning commission after market economy declined, the role of, a program evaluation office had itself reduced, but then DMO came into existence. And what we did was, the first thing was to create this output outcome indicators. And why did we do it? As government, since I'm a bureaucrat, I can understand that for me, the easiest task is to think through inputs. My job is done. Nobody's going to hold me accountable if I have spent my budget. We wanted to move from those inputs to outputs and probably to outcomes. And that's why we did that across 66 departments and ministries, across more than 500 schemes, we worked with each of these ministries to create those output and outcome indicators. And based on the budgetary allocation, which the finance ministry does, these sort of targets were devised, and thereafter the progress was measured on a dashboard. Every year, the vice chairman of the planning commission will sit with the secretary of that particular department and say that, okay, fine, how much progress you have made, and how sort of how you're doing, and what whether this scheme is doing well or not. Not everything was perfect. We had too many indicators. We had close to, out of these 500 schemes, we had close to 5,000 indicators. And slowly, iteratively, we started working with each of these ministries to reduce this number of indicators, improving the quality of indicators, forcing and pushing or nudging the ministries to create data systems, because they'll not accept an indicator if they did not have a data system to answer that question. And that's what we did. And, that's what happened. We have, done that all this while. Just the next slide now. Coming to the sector review. So, that was at the program or the scheme level. How did we go about sector? Now, sector, what happens is that the Prime Minister himself reviews the sectoral sort of reviews, he does. And what we have done is similar process, over 300 indicators, which sort of, the top, high level thinking that it gives across 12 sectors have been developed. There's a dashboard, and that dashboard, Prime Minister reviews it, all these sectors, and just sort of, targets are set. There again, sort of, the ministries do fill in progress, progress across each of those indicators, and, Prime Minister reviews it. And that's how the process does. This is not evaluation, surely. It's just more of monitoring that is being done at the Prime Minister level. But how does this monitoring, a strong monitoring system, feeds into creating evaluation systems? That's what I'm going to talk about next. All that is good, but if you don't have great data systems, it doesn't work. And so we started something called Data Governance and Quality Index, right? And that was looking at that how each of these 66 ministries and departments, what kind of sort of data system did they have? What was the maturity of the data system? What was the data preparedness? Were these data talking to each other? What kind of duplication efforts, duplications were there? What kind of metadata? And the same thing in health, same thing in sort of rural development, maybe saying something different. And we started creating those reports, and these were the kind of reports that will come out. Now, as a result, we did not leave it at, because we needed to support this ministries, and the Prime Minister office itself got involved, and they said, okay, each of the department and ministry is going to have a data and strategy unit. And they are going to work on these data systems, improve these data systems, and not only that, so that we have more open data across ministries being shared, and all that is slowly being facilitated in developing strong ecosystem. Right. Next. Now, then comes, suddenly in 2019, we were for 3 years, 3-4 years, we were working on this output outcome monitoring, framework, and thereafter on sectoral sort of, data system, sectoral reviews. And suddenly we were told that you need to evaluate these 126 schemes, right, of more than $30 billion. And we said, like the typical bureaucrats do, and since I'm one, so I know it, that, do it in 6 months. Now, nothing of that sort gets, but you can't make them understand, right? Because they are getting fixed salaries, assured salaries. So, and then what we did is that we suddenly went to academic institutions and suddenly realized that academic institutions did not have the capacity, despite all the size of India. And then what we do, so what we did, we intelligently divided them into more of a 10 sectoral kind of sort of, all those 126 schemes were put in these broad sectoral kind of, divisions. And then we sort of, outsourced them to the KPMGs and, ANYs of the world. Obviously, there was a strong monitoring from our side.
We worked with the ministry, conversation at every stage were done. Obviously, we took reviews from the inputs from the experts, but that's how we went about it. And how did we do it? What was the kind of methodology that we adopted? Next. So, okay. What we did is that it was not only a bottom-up kind of thing based on RACI plus E framework, but also a top-down kind of approach, which followed from what what was being talked about, that how each of these schemes contribute to the sectoral goals, right? And that's where things were brought together. We also took these cross-sectional themes, cross-sectoral themes you can call, which cut across multiple schemes, and that gives us insight as to how accountability and transparency or how use of IT is being handled across the whole development spectrum. Next. And we did not, so this was a one-off thing. We did not do that, we said how to institutionalize it. So then we created a development evaluation advisory committee, headed by the vice chairman, which had finance secretary also, and major spending departments, so as to institutionalize it, not have ad hoc evaluation, put it in place, right? Two good things that happened, that finance ministry meanwhile said that the log frame and theory of change has to be part of all the program or the scheme proposals. What did is that a bureaucrat didn't think in those high objective terms just because I could write good English, but he said, let me think through that. What is the input that I'm providing? What are the activities which are going to be undertaken? What is the output? What is the outcome? And what is the impact? And impact has to be there aligned to the objectives. So the policy making process, which is ad hoc, starts getting aligned. And that's what we did. Next. So the last was that, the capacity, this is the last point that I wanted to emphasize. Now, what did we do? As planning commission at the federal level changed, the state planning commission also became redundant. They also started slowly changing into their own think tanks, right? We did a institutional plus capacity assessment of all this planning commissions and their evaluation offices across the country, and BMGF. We took help of anybody and everybody. And what the second thing we did, which came to our help, was that Prime Minister was already working on scheme capacity building commission, which created competency framework. And based on our own understanding, we developed a competency framework for the whole monitoring and evaluation, right? And what we did is we brought this thing together to create curriculum. And then we took this curriculum, now we are taking it to IGOT, which is the government online training platform, where these small training modules are created. We're taking it to, central administrative training institutions, central training institution where bureaucrats come, so that we can tell them, right? The third thing, what we are doing is that we are taking it to education regulator to say that, okay, fine, why don't you bring capacity building courses, right? And what we are doing is, what we are doing is that we are simply not saying that we go there, provide training on monitoring evaluation, we're creating those conversations. What we're trying to do, if we go to Rajasthan, for example, we get the finance department, we get the statistics department, we get the evaluation department, we get high spending, implementing department, which are implementing the schemes, and all of them had conversations that how do I commission? How do I, what kind of evaluations are carried out? What is the kind of timeline? What kind of budgetary allocations are going to be there, right? And how do I use it? What are the systems in place that will ensure that all that evaluation is done, gets used? So those kind of conversation. So what happens is that each of the provinces will devise an M&E system, right? Which would be more owned by them and not imposed from us, from the nation. India is too big a country. Next. So that's what we have been doing with state governments. And I think Meghalaya, Sanjeev already pointed out, there are many states that we're working with. Meghalaya is mentioned, in fact. Thank you so much. That's what. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Dr. Mishra. And that's an interesting example of an effort of linking national and sectoral, but also linking several administrative level and territorial level, national and then state and sub-state. So we move to Dr. Shabnam Safraz, who is Senior Advisor, Social Sector and Development for the Planning Commission, Government of Pakistan. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much. Can I have my slides? Thank you. I'm really grateful to Alok because he's explained the Planning Commission, the processes, and it's very comparable to what we have in Pakistan. So Planning Commission is the apex planning coordination body, and we have 42 ministries underneath. I had the privilege to lead the social sector portfolio. And unlike the two sectors mentioned in his slide, which was health education, I had 6 subsectors under the social sector portfolio: health, education, population, manpower skill development, SDGs, and I was also looking after the youth affairs. So these subsectoral reviews, in my understanding, they make up the social sector review, and they are subset of the national sectoral reviews. So there was a question before that was put across in there. It's a picture story that I have here, and I hope to convey how we were able to use some of these concepts that we have been discussing and transform our sectoral review processes. So moving on, I'll be giving you the context and what interventions we had taken, what were some of the challenges, what partnerships came into effect, and what we think we could do now moving forward a little better, and how can such initiatives like NEC can help us as we move forward. So what you see over here is that while working very closely with the sectors and with the ministries, we try to streamline their quarterly reviews. We invested in smart, target-oriented monitoring. The objective was not to pinpoint gaps, but sit together and identify areas where mitigating measures and better coordination for intended impact can be achieved. Together, effort was made together while sitting with the ministries to use the trend lines, the variances, and projections to guide the investment decisions, because Planning Commission is where we make the national budgets and where we also do reallocations and repurposing if and when it is required. So as I said, I led the social sector portfolio and I had 6 sectors to oversee. I'm going to walk you through the health sectoral reviews to just give you an example of how we were monitoring and how we were. And I think it's also going to help you understand the national context and how we engage this at the subnational level. So we monitored the SDG 3 at the national level while keeping a close eye on the sub-indicators, as you can see over here, and where this helped us in identify where we needed to invest more to meet the gap. The national health indicators are disaggregated to evaluate the progress, because we are a large country and we have 4 provinces in 3 regions. So we disaggregate the national indicators into the regional and provincial indicators to evaluate the progress at the subnational level. And here you can see the universal health coverage, how it's disaggregated and with who is performing better and who is not. In this next slide, you can see how the SDG data is disaggregated. Again, the national health, we are able to see which of the provinces are lagging behind and under which indicator. And it is also compared alongside with the regional indicators, so that we are able to learn from the countries. We have a very formal twinning program with Sri Lanka at the moment, whereby we are trying to see where we are doing better in some of the areas, and we have a very formal program in place with support of UNDP. So I've talked about the national level, I've talked about the provincial regional level. Each province is further disaggregated, and this subnational data, each province is a composite of number of districts. The heat maps indicate the low performing districts. The targets are set and performance is internally monitored by the secretaries of these ministries and at the high level reviews that we hold at the Planning Commission on a quarterly basis. And we try to align the templates of monitoring both at the ministry level with the Planning Commission level, so that the internal monitoring on a monthly basis feeds into the quarterly high level monitoring and into the half yearly and into the annual reporting. So again, the periodic surveys, they help us in evaluating the progress and also identify the outliers. And this is routinely done for the different indicators that we undertake. The survey data is routinely triangulated with the operational service delivery data. And here on the right side, you can see polygon live tracking of vaccinators for monitoring their coverage. The geospatial mapping is also being used. for evaluating coverage. And all this data is routinely being reviewed by sectoral experts and is brought forth in a user-friendly format for the busy decision makers, as was very rightly pointed out in the session that we had earlier today. We are also using GIS mapping, as you see over here, to identify the underserved area, and this helps us in guiding expansion of our interventions as we move forward. When COVID-19 happened, whereas the production of short and long-term statistics was negatively affected, we had some successes as we adopted innovative techniques to fulfill data demands during the COVID-19 recovery and response planning. What you see over here are snippets from our National Health Facility Assessment, which was carried out across the 144 districts of Pakistan for a 410% increase in the national budget that we were able to secure for health in that year. And this served as the baseline for allocation of health funding post-COVID-19. It helped guide investment where there were larger gaps. So for every district, every health facility was, and we were able to see where we needed to upgrade these facilities to provide equitable access to the populations who were over there. We were also able to bargain and negotiate with the implementers and highlight the bottlenecks. For instance, this slide reflects that in every district, what is the status of the health human resource over there. So if they are asking for establishing new hospitals, they needed to also come up with health human resource plans. So these were important. Again, we have been using this data strategically to build compelling narratives and designing investment cases by placing before these insight before the decision makers and trying to guide the limited allocations into the right direction. Again, the subnational ranking that you see over here, this is a recent program where they needed to prioritize SDG investments. And the subnational rankings, they helped us in prioritizing districts where investments are needed, which are low ranking, where we would invest and we would have better impacts coming up in those districts. Again, the data are used to select the right indicators because a lot of financing goes into infrastructure and the other sectors always. So getting money for the social sector, it's extremely important to bring it to the policymakers. And we are using these indicators with strong rationale and providing baselines to the provinces so that target setting can be done and subsequent sectoral evaluations are much more focused and we are able to track them against the baselines that we have provided to them. So as we put this all together, this has come into effect through strengthening of coordination mechanism and data ecosystem. And we serve as a conduit at the Planning Commission between the subnational governments as well as the bilaterals and multilaterals. And this is an important arrangement. And this is how we are able to make the best use of the expertise which is available and strengthen the data system. Again, this is again what was mentioned very rightly, a multi-level approach, as Sanjeev pointed out, is extremely critical. During COVID-19, we established this secretariat and we were working with the development partners, with the academia, research institutions, sectoral experts, both nationally and internationally. The model was extended and we engaged partners for creating, as mentioned, the collaborative spaces for iterative adaptations. These are critical. This arrangement has proved pivotal in aligning ourselves for multiple SDG policy and program initiatives, exploiting nationally and internationally available subject expertise and accessing technical backstopping for analyzing data and developing rapid critical insights for use in corrective policy and program design. The country uses innovative digitized tools for including voices from underrepresented segments and collating data where it does not exist using our existing networks. What you see over here is a digitized survey, which helped us in getting insights from the youth, which make up 65% of our 230 million population. And in a matter of 30 days, we were able to get about 70,000 youth telling the government what are the areas they feel that the government should be prioritizing and what are the biggest challenges that they have. whereas it is important to create these spaces for cohesive solution, as was mentioned, it is important that this evidence that we are drawing from these multiple discussion forums and for consensus building, we have these strategy dashboards. So after we have the stakeholder consultations are categorized and archived in a strategies dashboard and is pivotal for generating reports and policy briefs. So what have been some of the key challenges? Our biggest challenge in strengthening the national evaluation system has been the resistance that you get associated with the accountability and the transparency that these systems guarantee. So the political instability, the bureaucratic transitions, the technocratic ability to pursue continuity of good work despite these transitions, weak institutional capacities, limited local capacities, as have been mentioned. I think access to data by the technocrats and by the partners who are trying to do evaluation is again a challenge. Missing links between monitoring, planning, and programming was something that we tried to counter. And I think what is critical to realize is realigning of the narrative to the evolving context so that you remain sensitive to the priorities of the new leadership. Multi-sectoral coordination. So it is not only sectoral evaluation, but multi-sectoral evaluations are also very critical for achieving the intended impacts. So moving forward, sorry, my last slide. We feel that the strategic utilization of comparative advantage of partners is extremely critical to address the country-specific challenges. Reform, it's important to reform the systems from within rather than to import a contextually irrelevant model, strengthen the analytic abilities for building compelling SDG investment cases, collaboration with other countries for optimizing on existing tools, programs, and lessons learned, and continue to strengthen the accountability forums by carefully viewing of the same within the existing national evaluation system rather than a parallel system, and adopting a collaborative participatory approach so that we are not seen as policing, but rather as partners and having a joint ownership of the entire process. Having worked in the international development sector and now with the government, I strongly feel that we need to evaluate how we are designing and evaluating our evaluation programs. I had a gentleman from one of the partners who visited me a couple of months back, and he told me that his program for health data analytics received an extension of another 3 years, and I had not seen him in the last 3 years. So if there is a missing link between those who have the technical capacities and to those who actually need to utilize those analytics, so I think we need to actually look at that. As I say that a publication in the highest impact vector journal is of no use if it is not helping us reform the conditions of the people on ground. Similarly, an evaluation system, if it is not helping us reform programs and policies, we need to rethink how we are running that. Thank you so much for your patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a very elaborate presentation on the architecture of the monitoring system and then the institution involved, the articulation between sectors and different levels, territorial levels, data source, data display, including georeferencing, and then use of data, I think it's, and for policy making. So perhaps we have only a few minutes before the break. So maybe we have 5 minutes, and in these 5 minutes, we can take advantage of any question that may come from the audience to the speaker. So I see one person there, and then two actually. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, thanks for the presentation. This is Monica Lomenya from the Independent Office of Evaluation of IFAD here in Italy. Several of the presenters have used systematically the word review instead of evaluation and sometimes monitoring review and so on. So I would like to ask from your experience, what is the relationship between maybe these self evaluations or reviews that you are doing while implementing these monitoring systems, and what is the relationship with maybe external or independent evaluations coming from donors or from other divisions in the government? Thank you.
Thanks. We take a second question and then we give a floor to the panelists. Please, sir.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Salah Dahir. I work with UNDP as Monitoring Evaluation Specialist, and I'm pleased to be with you here. Mine is just an observation and maybe learning from the expert. From the onset of the workshop or conference rather, as the title dictates, this resilience aspect. Resilience, in my understanding, is a bit relative unless it's simplified, and it needs a lot of effort to qualify the resilient itself. So I was just inquiring from the experts whether, because there's a little mention or none of the private sector engagements. And the reason why I'm highlighting private sector is two reasons. One, they have the resources, and one, also they have the influence. And mostly they are the ones who drive most of the service delivery, or be it a contractor or be it supporting other, especially energy, food, and all the technical service deliveries, especially in the fragile context. So my question is, does private sectors have a critical role in terms of achieving a resilient national evaluation system? And if so, since they're a bit distant from the national system in the fragile context country, how can can their role be well reflected for sustainable, resilient, and national evaluation system? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So perhaps we can give back the floor now to the two presenters, particularly the last two. Would you like to address these comments and questions?
Right. So just sort of the first question that you talked about was how to use reviews and versus monitoring, right? So since these sectoral reviews, what I'm meaning is that sectoral monitoring. And since it was being done at the prime minister level, it was decided to name them reviews, but actually the proper indicators were developed for all the sectors, all these 12 sectors, and the targets were set, and regular quarterly progress was being monitored. How do they lead to evaluations? My understanding is that a good solid monitoring system feeds into creating sort of data systems which help evaluations later on, because you have baseline data and everything is there. The second part you talk about that, what kind of role private sector does play in creating resilient national evaluation system. For us, since it was the first time that we were taking evaluations of more than 30 billion of dollars of schemes, and to be done in a very short period, because the Finance Commission wanted that in case these schemes are to be continued, they have to be evaluated so that we can allocate resources more efficiently. We did it for the first time, but thereafter we realized that there was a significant sort of capacity deficit in the ecosystem, and that's where we started developing our capacity building strategy. And now our organization has mandated that even if you involve private sector, it has to be in combination with the academic institution. So slowly we are hand holding the academic institution so that we can bring them, because somewhere the conflict of interest with the private sector, like you pointed out, that they're involved in so many of the setting project monitoring units and implementing some of the developmental efforts. So some kind of clash of interest or might come in, but we are obviating that problem by bringing an academic institution, and slowly as the institution's capacity increases, we'll have more and more academic institutions coming in.
I think he's explained it very well. I'll just briefly add on these words. I mean, like in our country, we use the words reviews, internal audits, external audits, stock takes. So, I mean, they are used interchangeably, really. And it just depends what process and how you're, managing those. The resilience, I think, is an important thing. And I think building the credibility and using data and your technocratic skills to make compelling cases so that it becomes binding for the decision makers, and they cannot ignore it. And we must never underestimate the ability as technocrats that we hold in order to do so. And again, in terms of the private sector engagement, we do have, I did show that snowflake model. And when I said that we were engaging with experts, with research, academic institution, policy think tanks, so we were engaging with both the public and private sector. And we were also nationally as well as internationally. And we also are in the process of establishing our data policy research units in different universities who have strength towards the different SDGs. And they are going to serve as our policy arms. We have a public-private partnership authority. And we feel the way forward is for the government now, as we increase the budgets for post-COVID-19 by 410%, the utilization didn't increase that much. And that was our learning, that the private sector has to be brought in. We are working on public-private partnership frameworks, both for health, education, to see what are the areas where the private sector should be given the lead, and we take up a more robust governance role. So indeed, it cannot happen without the private sector. And we have to optimize on the expertise which is available locally as well as regionally and internationally, and to build on to that.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we will have to close because we have the break and they ask us to be timely. But I wanted to first of all ask you to please join me in thanking the five panelists who has provided a lot of good, interesting experience. So let me mention again their name: Orifyan Namotsov, Sanjeev Sridharam, Anastasia Ladisheva, Alok Mishra, and Shabnun Sarfraz. Thank you again for your contributions, and you can continue talking to them bilaterally.